Dear friends, I greet you and welcome you to this final in the series of 9 webinars conducted by Council for World Mission in Asia, Pacifica, Europe and Africa, and here in the Caribbean and the Americas. COVID-19 has disrupted the course of our lives and in its wake infected over 46 million persons and left over 1.2 million dead. Those who have been kind enough to share their experience with the coronavirus have brought us face to face with our own mortality and liminality and have reminded us of how vulnerable we are, how truly vulnerable we are. We all share the pain of not being able to offer the usual ritual of homecoming to our loved ones. And while we offer our sympathies to those who have gone through this frightening experience, we live with the nagging fear that any of us could actually be the next to go through this life-threatening trauma. And yet, we also must live with the pain of careless and irresponsible personal behavior and poor example from those who occupy the highest office of leadership in many parts of the world, including the presidents of the United States of America and Brazil, 2 of the leading countries in this region. The callous disregard and disrespect by our leaders towards individuals, families, and communities who have suffered and are suffering the effects of this virus is both unbelievable and unacceptable. In these webinars, we have attempted to engage with the fierceness of the COVID-19 pandemic and to reflect on that which it has exposed. A pandemic of inequality, as some refer to it, entrenched endemic societal issues of racism, poverty, and gender-based violence, grave inequalities in healthcare systems, and the insatiable appetite to maintain empire's economy at any cost, creating an unhealthy and unnecessary dichotomy between human life and the economy. This webinar is an opportunity for us, the people of faith, to focus on life-flourishing perspectives on the pandemic and to grapple with the disruptions without losing faith or weakening our grip on the alternatives to which our aspirations and discernment lead. We are not looking for a new normal, nor a return to the old normal, whatever those are. Instead, we want to discern and follow where God is leading so that together we may enter this new disruptive way of living with the confidence and courage that our faith in God enables. CWM is grateful to those who have taken the time to prepare and to offer perspectives to inform these conversations. I invite us to allow our views to contend in this daring God talk, confronting our vulnerabilities, acknowledging the ambiguities and complexities of life, embracing the intersections of our lived experiences, and wrestling with God as we seek to make sense of the image of God, sovereignty and vulnerability, God omnipotent and God incarnate, God on the throne, and God on the cross. Sisters and brothers, welcome to this space, and let us reason together. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin, General Secretary of the Council for World Mission. Good evening to you in the Caribbean and Americas. Good morning and good afternoon to those of us from other parts of the world. This webinar is live on Zoom and Facebook, and it is being recorded to be made available at a later date. This evening, we will have a conversation or several conversations with two artists from the Philippines, Emmanuel Caribay and Emard Cañedo. And if I may be allowed to use island images, Emmanuel is from the Maori side. He's like the Kaumatua, he's the elder. And Emard is what is known in reggae culture as tomorrow people. Mm. But you have to realize that I'm from the other side of the world. And in this side of the world, tomorrow is already here. So that tomorrow people is today people in our views as well. Yesterday, Super Typhoon Ngoni passed through the Philippines. A week after Typhoon Malave went through the same areas. So we are very grateful that Emmanuel and Emard are able to join us when they have more important things to attend to. So grateful, Emmanuel and Emard. Our conversation will be in two parts. The first will be on the works related to the pandemic. And the second part will be on how art can help us think creatively and critically about theological subjects. And we have invited a panel of committed people to engage with and be in conversation with Emmanuel and Emard. And on our panel, we have Carol Duncan, Department of Religion and Culture, Wilfrid Laurier University, Ontario, Canada. Crystal Hall in Biblical Studies, United Lutheran Seminary, Philadelphia and Gettysburg, USA. Jackie Hidalgo, Latinx Studies from Williams College in Massachusetts. Althea Spencer Miller, Biblical Studies, Drew University, New Jersey. Chet Myers, Biblical and Political Theologies, Bartimaeus Cooperative Ministries in California. And Rod Pattenden is an artist and art historian, curator of art and bodies, interplay and spirituality from Newcastle in Australia. Warm welcome to the artists and to the member of the panel. Our first part for this conversation, we invite Emmanuel first to introduce the work that he does in the Philippines to motivate this culture of critical artwork among the young people and working towards developing the tomorrow people in the Philippines. And then we will go into the artworks that have been provided. So Emmanuel, could you kindly say a few words about the work that you do there? And please remember to unmute, Emmanuel.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me as one of your presenters. Well, this morning from our part of the world, for the others, it might be evening there right now. One of things, or one of the more positive things probably that the pandemic has created was it helped us focus on what we do and work towards its institutionalization. So we have we run a program of artist residency, especially for young people with mentorship. So unlike other residencies, we emphasize on the mentorship, mainly because this is geared towards enabling many of the young artists to unlearn the things they learned from school. So it is based on our understanding that much of the school system, especially the public school system, not just in the Philippines, but in the third world in general, are designed basically to dumb down people, enable for them to be better employees and subservient citizens to a generally oppressive and exploitative political economic system. So the program is basically designed to enable young and upcoming artists to have a better understanding, not just of their um, craft, but also of the more important things to consider in the arts. This includes a great deal of relearning art history and art theory from our perspective. And so what we do here is we host a group of young people. We will be showing them to you in a while to develop and hone their skills, and also to be able to come up with art that is not just conscious of keeping up with the trends in the general art scene, but more of striving to be relevant and connected to a bigger community context. So that is the main emphasis of this program here.
Thank you,
Hello.
Emmanuel. Thank you. Thank you for introducing us to the need to unlearn what we learn and to be more responsible and to be more useful. Because a lot of what we learn is make us useless and just people who are being used by others. So
Yeah.
well, if we can just move to some of your artwork, I mean that is really a conversation that needs to take place as well, because this panel are educators as well. So you're challenging us to think critically about what we do as educators. But I want us, if you don't mind, that we can move to the images. For two images, if you can, if in your case, if you can just say what inspired you to do these particular ones. Tunguhin.
Sione.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes.
Emard and I sort of had an agreement that he would go first. I mean, if you
Okay.
don't mind. Yeah.
That's absolutely fine. Langit 1 and Langit 2.
Yes.
Emard, if you can say a few words about yourself, and then we'll.
Hi, good morning and good evening to everyone. I'm one of the art residents here in Linangan, and I'm very proud that I am part of Sir Manny's art mentorship. And I'm here to discuss my artwork, and I want to tell about something about the artwork that I did during the lockdown. This is my point of view during lockdown because of pandemic. It has a big impact to everyone. Me also as an artist, and especially to those who are unsung heroes, are frontliners. I remember when I read the news about it, they need to say that we need to stay at home and about a couple of months, and then extended it. Because of that, we we have difficult to strive in our daily life. So our lifestyle are affected, our livelihood, income, and so many have lost their lives, especially those are frontliners. That's why I created these two artworks to commemorate and bring hope and a promise of a new day. That's it.
Can you say a few words about why you titled it Langit?
Langit, it means new hope, and also commemorate our unsung heroes who sacrifices their lives during the pandemic, the frontliners who dedicated their duties and obligation to prevent the spread of the disease. So that is a double meaning, the color of the sky, which means a new day. So we are always looking forward to that.
Okay. Now this particular work caught the attention of Jackie. So Jackie,
Yes.
if you wanna unmute and get us going on this conversation, please.
Hi, sure. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Yes.
I want to maybe also just start by, I'm honored to be here tonight, and I greet you from the Eastern time zone of the US in the unceded and occupied homelands of the Stockbridge, Munsee, Mohican people. It's also still All Saints Day here. So depending on your background, given mine, it's El Dia de los Muertos. So I just wanted to take a little bit of Zoom time to both honor the ancestors and to wonder about what the combination of social distancing and the weighty loss of loved ones that Colin described in the intro has done this year. I'm also relieved that I got to actually see you via Zoom. So there's this downside of the pandemic, but this upside that I get to have this conversation, yes. And I get to actually see you and engage with you in this way. So I'm really excited for how this goes. And I'd say that your description is part of what drew me to the Langit series, why it really interested me. You were pointing to multiple and in some ways the contradictory facets of the pandemic as an apocalypse, the way I might see it, yes. As a kind of locus of revelation amidst crisis. And that when I first saw the paintings, I wasn't quite sure what I was seeing. I imagined perhaps I was looking at a spectrometer or at bars in a prison cell. And then when I read your textual description and I saw the word sky, I started to think differently about it. And as a scholar of interpretation, it made me ask a whole bunch of questions you can also think about what determines how we interpret something, right? Like and what factors should matter. But I was attracted to what the sort of mixture of all of these things, because that played further with apocalypse for me as well, because it can have many different meanings to different people depending on where they are and what relationship we have to it. And I was sort of thinking about how the very appearance of both of these paintings and the way the light shifts between them, how it made me think about what has been so revealed under the pandemic, which are the structures of our world, that we've really come to see some of those structures so clearly. And what happens next now that we see those structures? What do we do now that we've seen those structures so clearly? And what's possible for us to do given our socially distant moment? So those were just some thoughts that I wanted to share, but thank you for sharing this work. And I look forward to hearing more about your perspective, your work, and what others have to say.
So there's something that's revealed, but there's still a lot that's hidden. I mean, there are multiple layers happening here, kind of teasing, allows us to peek a little to the apocalyptic, but what's behind these strips that are almost like bars or windows. How do others, do you want to address this or speak to Langit? Crystal, you're nodding. You wanna come in? And Rod is nodding as well. So Crystal and then Rod. And Carol.
First, let me say thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you on this panel and for the invitation, and greetings to those who are joining us online as well. I was nodding my head because I was just thinking about the ways in which this is a celebration of All Saints' Day today, or was yesterday, depending on where on the globe you are located. And thinking about that in relationship to not only the generations that have come before, but the generations who are yet to come, and the ways in which this piece with the verticality of the bars, the first thing that came to mind for me in this piece was the border wall at the US-Mexico border, and how, like this piece, the border wall also allows a catching of glimpses to what's beyond, and that this moment in which we're catching what's before, and yet we're so in the middle of it in this pandemic that we're yet to catch glimpses of what's beyond. And it's a piece that I think is very helpful in thinking about how do we connect the moments that we're able to see and yet not quite able to see yet, and the ways in which this pandemic is pointing us to those in-between spaces that we connect to the lives of our ancestors, and yet we also are connecting to the lives of those that are yet to come, even when we are surrounded in this moment by so much death in the pandemic. So that was my head nodding, if you will.
Thank you. We look across the border, but we look across also to the ancestors. Very powerful. Rod, you nodded your head as well, Rod.
Sure. So welcome from Newcastle, Australia, which is the home of the Indigenous people. I was really struck by this image and its elusiveness. I know we all are cultured people, and we grow up and consume, as it were, images which help us speak and talk and articulate our sense of culture. And this work doesn't give itself away very easily. So there is within me a recognition of frustration and that awful first world experience of boredom. That circular sense of, I'm not quite sure where this fits and where does it fit within my image landscape. And it echoed for me the experience of being in lockdown and being frustrated as a consumer of images. Because in my culture, images are seductive and powerful and alluring, and I want them. I want them with all the capacity of Photoshop to have these things consumed within my horizon. So this work evokes for me the kind of experiences of being in lockdown, of being having my life simplified, having not having my life piled up with things. So there is an invitation in this work, looking into the sky, looking at this sense of emptiness, to actually live with the results of this pandemic experience and to in fact experience the simplicity, the invitation of no spaces, no images filling up my life. So there is a sense of delight or even euphoria in my seeing here that is a wonderful recognition of the simplicity and the fullness of and looking and seeing in that kind of cultural way. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. Carol, you also nod. Yes, can you come in now? Unmute, Carol.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can.
Hi, good evening, good morning, everybody. I'm coming to you from Southern Ontario in the center of the country of Canada in the Great Lakes region, from Wilfrid Laurier University. And it is Sunday night, November 1st. It's All Saints' Day. It's a time of memorial. Greetings. Thank you for this beautiful artwork and the invitation to share some commentary on it. But with this piece in particular, I was confronted by its contradictions. It's the barcode for shopping. online shopping, consumerism, shopping by touch, and of course the contradiction, the idea of financial freedom through spending and the connections globally in terms of cycles of production and distribution. And so for me, I was struck by how much this was evocative in the image, and also what's beyond the actual real life glimmers of experiences, lives, and landscapes that we may or may not see, that may be obscured, in fact, through our very own consumerist practices, but also the tantalizing invitation to, to look beyond the barcode and the kind of consumerist shiny image. So those are some of my initial reactions to this piece. It really is deeply evocative, and at the same time, all of those contradictions are held in it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Carol. Can we take one more comment, and then we'll move on to the next one?
Yes, this is.
Thanks, Althea.
Yeah. I wasn't sure I was going to say anything about this, but and I'm Althea Spencer Miller, and I'm coming to you from New Jersey. Good evening, good morning, in our different time zones. When I looked at this picture, I was confused what to do with it. But I found the comments very, very helpful. And it made me ponder the ways in which artistic interpretation connects to the dominant discourse around an experience. I started thinking about a different kind of muted voice, the introvert who might actually be comforted by the opportunity to quarantine or to sequester, and might find comfort in looking through the slats and seeing the world distant and not have to engage with it in that moment. So this quietened voice that might just think, oh, this is a wonderful experience to be here. So I just wanted to flag the possibility of that kind of response in the mix of the pandemic. Thanks.
Thank you, Althea. So you see, Emad, you have created a lot of thoughts in the panel. There is contradiction, there is confusion, there is vulnerability, there is, well, sensuality, there's invitation. And in our previous panel, there was we had a presentation on this thing, vulnerability, how the COVID-19 make us all vulnerable. And then Tiniko Maluleke asked the question, what are we? It feels like we are control freaks, that we can't deal with being vulnerable, but that's our starting point. To be human is to be vulnerable. So your work is inviting us into that stage, or that where we can't really control, we can't really figure it out. And thanks for that invitation, Emad. We can spend the whole session just speaking. We'll come back to you, but I want to move on to the next work. So let's get to Asok. I think I've mispronounced his many. Can you say something about this? What's the inspiration here, or the irritation?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Asog actually is a Visayan, or one of the languages here in the Philippines. It's a Visayan word for seer or prophet. So just to give you an idea, the works that I presented, or that I have here for the pandemic, were done late last year. So none of them were done at the time when the pandemic was already around, or it was like an impending pandemic. So I guess you can call it serendipitous. Unfortunately, they happen. And basically, the body of works that I'm showing is nothing new in terms of what it's trying to say. It, in many ways, amplify a growing concern among many of us about a more dystopic, a more cataclysmic scenario in the future. So you have a figure that seems to like the contrast between the two figure faces, one that has four pairs of eyes, and then one the one on the foreground without the whose eyes are closed. And then you have two animals that represent water. One is a water buffalo, which thrives in places where there's abundance of water. And then you have the camel, which thrives in a place where there is a very little water. So those are the symbolisms. I leave it to the viewers to decide what it's trying to say. But my approach is basically I try to limit the ambiguities here. So one metaphor is reinforced by another in order to basically strengthen the overall message.
Thank you, Manny. Althea and Jackie. Althea, why don't you get us started?
Yes, thank you very much for that explanation. I chose this picture to comment on, not being sure why I chose this picture to comment on, except that it seemed to evoke a sense of displacement, in betweenness. I might even want to say a theology of indeterminacy. I felt strange before it because I wasn't clear about the cultural signifiers, and I needed to get over that lack of clarity and the tendency to want to be literal about the picture and just allow it to have its impact. So when I saw the explanation in the title, the subtitle, Male Babylons, and I'm not sure I've pronounced that correctly, priestess, asexual, sterile, and that's Esau. It was an invitation to think with the unfamiliar and to think about the unfamiliar. That the priestess might be asexual, that the Asag might also be a queerly gendered being, queered the entire picture for me. And so what looked like hollow structures between the two faces became spaces that made me think of death, made me think of fallacy, but couldn't get me to the place where I felt the picture was sterile, that it was a deathly picture, that it actually had challenges in it that required a recognition of the way the world has been upended, not only by the pandemic, but certainly in the US by the kind of leadership we've had for the last 4 years. It made me think about queerness. It made me think about the church, what it means for the church to occupy a space that's a kind of indeterminate, in between, betwixt and between kind of space, where the categories that we're accustomed to thinking of in terms of our ministries to the world might not be as stable as we make them out to be. What does it mean to actually occupy that space where certainty is not a given? And that's one of the gifts of the pandemic, I think, to move us out of our tendencies to exactness and to invite us to occupy spaces of instability and learn how to live there, minister from there, and function there. And so what kinds of conversations would those ideas generate in terms of the ministry and mission of the church? So all of that from the picture.
Thank you, Althea. Jackie, do you want to add to that?
Sure, I will just share a few things. Thank you, Althea. I really loved that this is a kind of theology of indeterminacy. I think it speaks to a little about why I was interested and engaged in this image. When I first saw it, my immediate reaction was a little bit like it was signifying on the great chain of being as an idea that you have this kind of hierarchy with this man who has, presumably sort of like a male figure as like a double vision up top, and then this statuesque kind of feminine form whose mouth has been removed and eyes are closed. So she's a subject amidst this, amidst the sort of work of human civilization that's been hollowed out, almost kind of like the ruins of Rome in a De Chirico painting. And then you have the animals at the bottom. And because I was seeing it in the pandemic, I thought that part of what the painting was doing by then giving me this sort of queering opportunity was offering a critique of the great chain of being and where it's led us, but also offering us a way to see it differently. Instead of seeing it as a hierarchy, instead seeing it in how things blend together, how they're all interrelated, how it's not so neat to distinguish between sky and human civilization and earth, and how those come together. But I really, I was really interested in the sort of use of the four eyes as well, if in part because I'm four-eyed myself as someone who wears glasses. So I was also just sort of interested in the four eyes at the top, but then the eyes being closed in the middle. And I'd just love to know more about what was going on with that in a kind of way that Althea described it in a theology of indeterminacy. It was so interesting.
Thank you. Many, can you explain, because a lot of your work have these four eyes characters. Can you explain what that means for you?
Well, it actually started as something I appropriated from an artist I saw some time ago, an Australian artist. His name is George Kittles. He used he had a painting where one of the figures there had four eyes. And I thought it was a very powerful device. But then I don't know what he meant to evoke with the four eyes, but in my case, I wanted the four eyes to suggest some kind of divinity onto the figure by almost making the idea of all-seeing kind of literal. But I thought it's also an interesting image visually, to make it literal. So that's how it started.
So
I'm also kind of, sorry?
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I also appreciate that you noticed that there is a suggestion of hierarchy in this painting, because I wasn't thinking of that when I did it. I just was dealing with a compositional problem of how to put all of these images together. And since the format was vertical, so I just kind of put them one on top of the other. But it's very interesting, and I think I like that kind of the way it was read.
Thank you. Rod Paddington recently curated George Kittles. Can you say a few words?
Yes, I think Manny's right. There's an intensity of looking that's achieved with this double eyes. And what I see in this image is this is the prophet, a dark-skinned indigenous person who, in the midst of this crumbling city, actually sees far clearly what interests me also in the hierarchy of the image is that we have what appears to be the ruins of a city. So I'm wondering whether we might interpose a reference to Babel. This is the construction of human beings who build culture to great heights. But instead of seeing the peak of a great and grand edifice, we see this figure. Both figures are not speaking. So in a sense, the intensity of the work is brought to this capacity to see the future. So in the middle of the complexity of the Babel, the lack of speaking and understanding, here is somebody who prefers the indigenous voice, the one connected to the land, which of course is at the bottom of the picture. These water beasts, this reference to nourishment and replenishment from the natural experience. So my sense is perhaps that indigenous people, people who are connected to land, might be the ones who see, and may we listen to such voices.
Thank you. Now I'm gonna, time is moving, and you know, it's really difficult for me as a Pacific Islander to say we are running out of time, eh? But we are in a different, I mean, this virtual space. So we'll keep on moving. Manny, we're gonna have a different approach in this next section, where the interpreter will have the first go. So Empire is our next text, and Crystal is, I think it was Crystal who was quite moved by this one. Can you start us off here?
Thank you for the opportunity to engage with this work. I was immediately struck when I saw this piece about how it's so much a study of hierarchical opposites and the ways that those opposites characterize the colonial project, the imperial project. You have the white ephemeral cloud in heaven contrasting with earth below, the dominant figure clothed in black with the flowing cape, while the figure below only has on a simple white shirt. The dominant figure, he seems so unflappable and contemplative above it all with his head held high, but his mouth is curved down. And the figure below is smiling with what looks like missing teeth exposed, facing the viewer, but also with eyes closed in an almost childlike expression. The dominant figure is light-skinned, the smaller figure is dark-skinned. So everything in these two figures encodes imperial values about heaven over earth, the clothed over the unclothed, large over small, wealthy over those who perhaps have very little, light-skinned over dark-skinned. And what was especially striking to me was the surrounding what looked like mountaintops and the ways in which it seems like this hierarchy is being replicated over and over and over again, perhaps not only in the mind, but maybe even across the globe. The thing that I found most striking was the placement of the hands of both figures. The one hand of the dominant figure seems to bless the viewer, perhaps, and the other hand of the dominant figure is paternalistically touching the head of the smaller figure. And so these gestures are toward heaven and toward the subordinate, but the smaller figure seems to not even gesture, but is holding his hands loosely at the sides. And so for me, the key interpretive theme here was the ways in which the smaller figure is the only one that's actually connected to the earth because of the bare feet that are on the ground. And the biblical text that immediately came to mind was from 1 Corinthians, that has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world, and has God not chosen what is low and despised, the things that are reduced to nothing. And so in this time of pandemic and climate disruption, I think this piece really points to where we need to be oriented, where we need to keep our feet and our heads as we go about our God talk.
So what did you make of the banana there, Crystal?
I found the banana intriguing as well, that that even as he's not gesturing, that the banana is pointing down, I think, toward the earth as well. That the feet and the banana and the hands are all sort of orienting you toward earth as perhaps a source and a grounding. And yet the dominant figure seems totally disconnected from it. And I think that's important interpretively, that in this time where the earth is screaming and yet we're ignoring her, I think that there's something important about that downward, earthward orientation.
Is there another reading? This figure is sitting between the legs of the dominant one. Does that make any difference? And previously, there was the second figure was going up the mouth of the other one. I mean, the one that we just looked at. Does that make a difference here with the holding a banana?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does. I mean, I think it just continues to emphasize the kind of paternalism and the dominance of the figure. If we were to read this in a queer way, I mean, we could even say that the dominant figure is perhaps even giving birth to this notion of subordination. And if we wanted to play with the gender a bit, that it's so all-encompassing, that everything about this subordinate world is being shaped by the dominant figure.
Is there another, somebody else want to speak on this one?
The banana struck me as a Caribbean person of how the market works and import, export, and who controls. I mean, like going in a supermarket here in the UK, I'm always curious why people go for Dole banana instead of banana from the Leeward Islands, or other, and which bananas are cheaper and which one is more expensive, and who controls the market. So there's something about commodification, not only about earth. So I read that there as well.
Thank you, Michael. Any other comment? Cargo culture is one of many subjects. Yes.
If I may, I am hesitant about this because I don't know how race works in the Philippines, and I'm drawn to the difference in their complexions, and I'm infusing perhaps inappropriately race into this, and I see the hands on top of the head almost in a simulation of a drumming action, and the way the younger looking person is seated, it's almost like infantilizing this person. And it reminded me of a series of pictures I had seen that were painted in Italy, where the Ethiopian eunuch was depicted as, over time, over a period of centuries, the depiction of the eunuch changed from being an upright human being to being in almost an ape-like position. And so I'm sort of imposing the Western view, the US view of the banana symbolism in this, which is where I feel it might be inappropriate, but there's something so trivializing, and it plays into my race sensitivities from here in the US.
Thank you. I'm sorry to be the timekeeper here, but Manny, do you have something you want to say here before we move to Emmaus?
Well, yeah, I think you got it exactly as I intended, and I think it's working. The device of limiting the possible contradictory reading of the image is controlled. So yeah, the banana is definitely a political statement there, a political economic statement. It's about us being a banana republic. And Althea is also very much right on the dot when she speaks about racial relationships. Incidentally, by next year, we will, I don't know if it's a word about celebration, but we will have the 500 years marking the event of the Spanish colonization of the Philippines. So that was when Christianity through Roman Catholicism was introduced in the land, and that's exactly what that priest on top of him, that happens to be a Dominican priest, is doing on the head of the native. It's drumming the ideas to his head, and that's theology, you know. And it's also a statement of how theology can be very powerful, depending on how effective those who are conveying theology are to the people. Like the Spaniards were so effective in introducing this European God to us, that it took very little of them to control about 5 million of us at the time. So at any given time, there wasn't even like more than 50,000 Spaniards running the whole country. But because they introduced to us such a radical notion of a God, and a God that they have the access to, and a God that looks like them, they were so effective in controlling us. And that's theology.
So that's a theology we need to unlearn, eh?
A great deal of unlearning.
Yeah.
Because it's still controlling us up to now.
Yes. So may I suggest that we move on to the next one, and Chad Myers will lead our conversation on Emmaus, and he will share his PowerPoint. Chad, if Sai, if you can take our PowerPoint down.
Welcome from the Ventura River watershed in Southern California, the traditional homelands of the Chumash, and happy All Saints Day, or All Souls Day, as it may be. I'm just going to share a couple of slides here. I was reflecting on Emard's Langit, and how I shared that with a artist friend, and he said, yeah, you know, it's kind of an exercise. The more you look at it, the more the bars fall away, and the more you see what's behind. So I really commend Emard for giving us not only an image but an exercise. And so I wanted to do a kind of a similar exercise with this image. This is probably one of Manny's most famous images, at least among theologians in the West, Supper at Emmaus. And I believe this is the 2015 version of an image that dates back at least to 2000. You can clarify that for us, Manny. I'm one of many people who have used this image, in my case, in working to read the Lucan text politically. And so I just wanted to put the image in the context of the overall Emmaus Road story, which is full of mysterious appearances that take on different appearances depending on the ideological and theological lens of the viewer or reader. I want to indicate several misrepresentations of the Emmaus story in traditional Western religious art. This is the first of these misrepresentations, the very famous religious painting in American culture painted by Swiss pietist artist Robert Zun in 1877. Warm and tranquil scene, looks like something from the Hudson River School or Disneyland. The scenario portrayed in Luke 24, however, is hardly contemplative. Only 48 hours earlier, Jesus of Nazareth was summarily executed by the Roman military as a dissident. So narrative common sense would suggest that the two disciples in our story are neither leisurely nor calmly contemplative. At this moment, they would be rather on the lam, hustling down a back road, getting the hell out of Dodge, so they don't meet the same fate as their leader. In other words, this might be a more appropriate representation. A painting also from the second half of the 19th century by American abolitionist artist Thomas Moran, entitled Slave Hunt in the Great Dismal Swamp. It depicts escaping slaves being chased by slave watchers at the height of American apartheid. The image better captures the dilemma of the fugitive disciples of the Emmaus story, who would have been, in modern parlance, hightailing it for the border in order to lay low. They were anxious, they were terrified, they were blaming each other, they were wondering what their next move might be, etc. So perhaps this kind of contemporary image is a photo taken at the Lorraine Motel just one day after Martin Luther King's assassination, April 4th, 1968. That captures the hard terrain of the Emmaus story. It wouldn't be difficult for us to imagine how civil rights leaders would have been feeling on this day. The city was on lockdown. King's lieutenants were going crazy trying to figure out what had just happened, why and how their leader had been gunned down, who was behind it, what it meant for the movement, and whether they might be next on the hit list. Nor does this pietist image explain why Jesus is not known to the disciples on the road. He looks perfectly recognizable in Robert Zuhn's work with the appearance of calm. Well, the late dissident priest Daniel Berrigan once suggested that perhaps it was because Jesus had been so completely beat up and disfigured by his torturers that he was literally unrecognizable. After all, Luke tells us later that these scars were still visible on the risen Jesus. And I suspect they were considerably more than 3 surgical little cuts. Now, this is very hard to imagine, particularly for the American pious imagination shaped by religious art like this, that offers only a scrubbed, laundered, and sanitized Christ. You know, Easter as kind of Hollywood happy ending. The third aspect of the Emmaus story to point out is the nature of the Bible study. Jesus is holding on the disciples with the road, which keeps emphasizing that it's the prophets and not their corporate sponsored hagiographies who orient us on how history should be read. Their witness is the hermeneutic key to everything, argues the stranger on the road, which is why disciples need to practice literacy in the prophetic tradition, which helps us understand why their leader had been lynched. So in Luke's story, the catechism in prophetic literacy goes on for a while, apparently, because it grows dark and the disciples have to literally force Jesus to stay the night with him, perhaps reminding him that once Roman curfew fell, it would be particularly dangerous. And that brings us to the famous moment portrayed by Garibay, in which the stranger expounds scripture famously revealed in the breaking of the bread. Now, I want to ask Manny, and you can answer this in a minute, whether this image of Caravaggio's disputed Summer at Emmaus was at all an inspiration. In the original version, Jesus looks decidedly female, while the disciples appear rough like true peasants. This was too controversial for church authorities, who made Caravaggio redo it, dressing up more with conventional images, reminding us how our churches are forever wanting to substitute the conventional for the prophetic. So Manny, you've done many different versions of this image, and I'd love you to tell us about their differences. They typically include the red dress, the stigmata on the woman's hands. And you've written about it and been quoted a lot about this as a cultural image of Filipinos kind of laughing at how clueless they were, thinking that Jesus was Western, Jesus was a male. And I think the great genius of your image is that it captures perfectly the tenor of the whole Emmaus story. Jesus' appearance is utterly and subversively surprising. And when I first encountered your image, I thought, yeah, this is the hermeneutic key to the whole narrative, which religious art has obscured for us by making it appear to be conventional, as if nothing really had changed by the execution and insurrection of Jesus. So I want to conclude by just making a remark about laughter as the most appropriate response to resurrection among oppressed peoples. Among folks, this kind of humor, both political and often self-deprecating, is a common response to grief and trauma and rage. Whether Native American, Black, Jewish, or other, laughing at empire and its predicaments, especially through parody and caricature, is a way of subverting the domination system's claims to sovereignty, including sovereignty over one's spirit. So in this case, it's just hilarious, and it is hilarious, just how wrong we've gotten those subversive, liberating biblical stories on the Emmaus Road. So I'm a big fan of your work, really appreciative of this image. Thank you.
Mhm.
Manny?
Yes, thank you so much, Chad. I mean, I wasn't aware that Caravaggio had another version done. I'm only aware of the first one that you showed, and the first one definitely has a Christ that looks more feminine uh, than the second one. So, and of course, I mean, after giving it a long time to execute, that's definitely deliberate. And yeah, I but now that I'm talking about it, I think I forgot what your question is, or did you have a one?
Well, I was curious as to what was behind the various versions of this image. You've done, I think, 3 or 4, maybe more.
Well, I think it's mainly the demand. You know, like along the way, some people wanted to acquire one for themselves, so I just kind of that was the more practical side of it. But then I wanted to do also a variation of the work in a way that kind of explore the other ways it can be represented. But as it came out, it's really hard to come up with something much more than what you have already done. But I did appreciate the one that you showed where the second version of the Road to Emmaus, uh, which I never really thought about. The idea of Christ being unidentifiable by his own disciples.
Hmm. Does anybody want to add just 2 seconds on that one? Emmaus, I mean, it's a woman who was resurrected. No?
Mhm.
Thank you, Chad, for sharing your reading. And well, maybe Manny can do another one at some point. Maybe make it a lesbian woman, Manny. Would be interesting to see
Yeah,
what that
yeah.
would look like. Yeah, or trans.
Mhm.
But let's move on to the armchair image, and I think the armchair Christ is Althea. Do you want to get into that one? Unmute, Althea.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I actually loved this picture and found it full of ambiguities. I saw a bit of humor in it that might not have been intended. It's this moment when Jesus is just like saying, dear God, I've got to sit down and take a rest from this work. Give me a glass of wine. This is an obdurate kind of people. I need time out here. Which is not a way we think about Jesus. He's always kind of insouciant. But then on the more serious side, the notion of an armchair Christ, as represented by the church, this picture, this image for me disrupted the armchair notion of someone, especially a white male, sitting back in this copious chair, this commodious chair, and perhaps smoking a cigar and having a drink. This was a discombobulated Christ, with strings that could have been puppeteering strings, manipulating the Christ, or the Christ, this Christ type manipulating others. But the positioning of the body was like a study in absurdity, convoluted, distorted, so that but filled with liturgical symbols and Christian symbols, the wine, the crusade sword, the Bible, the stigmata being very present, but an incredibly absurd image of almost an overstuffed, hapless kind of being. And I was taken with it as a critique of the church, possibly as representative of Christ, a critique that suggests that the church is could be so self-absorbed in its accessories, in its positions, that it was no longer free to do the work that it needed to do, even while it was demonstrating all the semblances of this Christ-likeness. So from the funny idea of Jesus really needing a glass of wine because of the obduracy of this human life that he was dealing with, these human lives, to the immobilization of an institution or institutions that are actually just tripping over themselves. That was sort of the scope of things.
Thank you, Althea. Rod, I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you speak on other armchairs, images by many where Christ is the armchair on which theologians sit? Can you say something about that?
Absolutely. So one of the characteristic tropes in Manny's work is this figure of this armchair Christ, and most often the figure is asleep. And what I take that to reference to is the great rest of the church in its inability to speak and respond to the situation it finds itself in. We are not only asleep, we are blind, we are resting while the world goes on around us. So this is a figure of the irrelevance of the gospel in a culture gone mad. So it provokes a question about waking up to the capacity to be present, to get out of the armchair and offer some basic hospitality to people who have no seat. So I think it's a provocative image, very unsettling. And I have to admit that I have one of these in my local congregation. It's the thing that they see when they arrive at church every Sunday morning is a bishop figure asleep while there's a volcano about to erupt in the back, which is a reference to the context of the Philippines and the Western Pacific, which is marked by this chain of volcanoes. So watch out, something's about to erupt, get out of your chair. So a very evocative and disturbing image of this prophetic capacity in Emmanuel's work.
Thank you, Rod. Time is escaping. So Manny, do you want to say something, or shall we move on to the next one?
Well, just to appreciate how sharp the panelists are, and I mean, I'm really kind of amazed as to how well you're able to get the intended idea here, and yeah, and I guess to say a little bit more, and it is really intended at the church as an institution, and having been thoroughly institutionalized, Christianity, as represented by its many functionaries, including theologians, basically has committed more time unto itself than to really seriously pursue not just words, but strategies and actions as to how to be faithful to its declared principles. So yeah, I think it's really kind of just allowing things to go by and let the real evils in society to really control how things run, and really determine the state of things, as well as the outcome of the future. So there's a lot of not just hesitation, but probably even unwillingness on the part of the church to participate in the project of social engineering, and presently right now that is aggressively being led by the big corporations, who are the ones who really are defining what culture is, defining what ideology is.
Thank you. I mean, someone has just noticed how the head is in a box, or maybe a frame, or maybe a microwave, or maybe a banana crate.
Yeah,
microwave
it's. Well, that part I just decided to make it a little bit more ambiguous. Initially, I was thinking of a television set, but this is like a dated one, so it's like
okay.
a tube, a box, unlike what the TV sets that you have right now that are flat.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next one, Patala, and I think Carol and Jackie. Carol
yes.
Is screen.
Can you see me?
No, we can't see you, Carol.
Okay, here I am. I'm back.
Yeah.
Okay, do you have order, or we can just jump in?
You go first, Carol.
Okay. I was really taken by this image. What did I get? Looking at it, I was reminded from the name Batala of the Yoruban Orisha called Obatala, from the Yoruban pantheon, from what is in now modern-day Nigeria, but also very broadly spread through the transatlantic slave trade. And Obatala is also a creator god in the Yoruban tradition. And I see here that Batala is fashioning a shepherd's crook. His hammer is still hot from the fire. He reminds me of the blacksmith, the divine blacksmith of Ogun, also a Yoruban Orisha. And we can see also, you know, in the foreground, the image of, and once again, I'm wondering if I'm reading race into it, but I do see kind of racialized image of white or Europeanized Christ figure as well. And also the shroud that is kind of semi-permeable with Batala. So this image for me evokes, I guess, ideas about the persistence and presence of indigenous ways of understanding the divine, and the creative impulse as well, and wrestling with and fashioning new ways to call people together, even within the context of empire and colonization for centuries. I always think of the Philippines and the Caribbean, which is where my parents are from. I was born in England and raised between England, the Caribbean, and Canada, as being connected, because Caribbean and Philippines are from the first decades of colonization, from 1492, and only 29 years later we have the Philippines with Magellan. So these are the things, these are my kind of emotional reactions to the image and what I was drawn to.
Thank you. Jackie, I'm going to just can I hold you for the Jacob one? Yeah. Does anybody else have something to say about this particular one? Rod. Julie, you haven't said anything. Rod.
Yeah, so I think I find this work one of Mani's most disturbing images. The figure has two sets of eyes, and one seems to have the quality of addressing me as a viewer inside the picture, and then the other set of eyes look like they're kind of looking outside the picture. So it mirrors my imagining engaging this work within its frame. And the surface of the work has been scored and textured as if it's falling like skin away from its own surface. So it's about to collapse. So it's a very disturbing environment. And in the midst of that, you have Christ with these great indigenous references of a hammer, which is, you know, it's got a nail caught in its grasp. So it's as if Jesus has just pulled out the nail out of his own hand, which is a disturbing kind of image and a very visceral kind of experience. And then he's got the crowbar in the other hand. So here is somebody who's pulling things down, who's about to build things up. I think it's a terrifying depiction of a Christ who's a liberator, who's about to square things with the order of things, about the culture of empire, and is about to disrupt the very surface of reality. So I think it's a frightening, disturbing picture, a concept of liberation that's going to rip and shred the surface of the context of the reality in which I live.
Thank you, Rod. This is, well, according, if I may quote another artist, good artwork is something that irritates you. So Manny has this gift to irritate a lot of people. So thank you for that. Are there, time is again, sorry to be the timekeeper. Maybe Manny, let's move to the Jacob one, eh? And then ask Jackie to say a few words, then you can pull us together and show us your kids, the kids. Jackie?
Yeah, hi, yeah, thank you. This is all of these works have given me so much to think about. You know, I was really drawn to this work for multiple reasons. First, right, this might be a different kind of connection between the Americas, as Carol was just pointing to, in the Philippines, right? The shared histories of Spanish colonization made me think perhaps of maybe us having a shared muralist tradition. This reminded me of Mexican muralism, especially thinking of the ways that, and the Mexican-American muralism in the US, and how it sort of depicts everyday social struggles in a kind of mythic style. But it also really resonated with me because of events in the United States at present, really since Ferguson in 2014, the rise of so many images that I've seen in the US of confrontations with police around police violence, especially anti-Black police violence. And I thought especially of a photo from 2016, an image of Aisha Evans' detention outside the headquarters of the Baton Rouge Police Department. And looking at this image, I want to know more about the specific context that it's referring to. And then, you know, being the kind of scholar I am, I want to know about why. I want to know more about the context. What difference would it make to me to know more about the context, to know more about the words on the sign? And then there was a last thing coming out of sort of biblical scholarship that I actually wanted to mention and talk about, just because it also made me think about this article on the Eden narrative in Genesis by Frank Yamada. And what he does in that article is he reads Eden through the lens of Manzanar, where Japanese Americans were incarcerated during World War II in the United States. And Manzanar means Spanish, means apple orchard in Spanish. It was also a concentration camp. And Yamada saw in the Garden of Eden, he saw it more as a prison than a garden. And the God of the text was a stand-in for kind of a capricious authoritarianism. And I've loved that essay, but I've struggled sometimes when I teach it in class. And when I look at this image, I'm reminded of a way of reading Genesis as a critique of the authoritarian practices of state repression. And displacement. And I was wondering, precisely because I love Yamada's reading, but my students don't often love Yamada's reading, and I've struggled with teaching it, how audiences have responded to this depiction, this kind of naming it of Jacob and the God. So I was sort of curious about that. But thank you for your work. It's really amazing.
Thank you, Jackie. Manny, our time is running out. Can you say a few things here?
Yeah, thank you, Shioni and Jackie. Yeah, first of all, the image reflects part of my personal history, being an activist during my younger days. I still like to do it, but I'm getting older, so it's physically very demanding right now. Um, the image is actually taken from a story in Genesis, and to me, it's very important for us because I look at the people who came up with this story, and I'm amazed at how they base their identity on a person who cheats. Jacob was a cheat, and it's even more interesting how the Jews partly sees God as an adversary, someone whom they need to overcome, and that forms the basis of their collective identity. One who wrestles with God and prevails. In contrast, I think this the main weakness of the Philippines as a collective is there's really no sanctification of our identity, unlike the Jews. So it's the most elusive thing when it comes to us as a group of people, and we well, it's not simply just about blaming our series of colonial history, but it's also that inability to sanctify an understanding of our history. And to me, in this case, I wanted to emphasize that what gives identity to a people is their collective will to overcome an adversary. So in this case, that adversary that represents God are the institutions that oppress people who are struggling to fight for their for justice.
So the activist is Jacob, God is the soldier, the police.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So
And this is
I think
the wrestling.
Yeah, I think I find that a very interesting theological way of theologizing. Like the Jews somehow are still able to look at those who conquer them, to see the leaders of other lands who invade them as the instruments of God.
Folks, thank you, Emad and Manny. As we were talking, I saw Emad scribbling very, very fast. So I tried to get what he was drawing, and I thought, oh, maybe he's, his mentor. He's having a draw of his mentor. Maybe he's drawing the images that Chad was showing on his response to Emmaus. So we were able to get what he was doing, but it shows to me, if that can be shown, Sai and Peachy, that what's more important is the mentoring that takes place. So to be able to sit and to pass on. And pause on that one. I really like the one, Manny, I like you, no question about that. But the young person on the side, that's tomorrow people. That's tomorrow people. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for what you do, and it's very moving.
Well, I would like to extend an invitation to all you guys once the atmosphere of restriction is more relaxed. Like we have a nice place here. I think you can partly see the view around me. And, like whenever you feel like coming, you're most welcome, and see what we do. In our own little way, we try to participate in the project of, affecting worldviews.
Mm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. So that's
Yes.
Emard showing us the place that we built for this program.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Quite moving, because we are all educators.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Michael, because our time is we're running out of time.
Okay, so
Michael.
thank you so much for having us.
This
for
is the
morning.
beginning, Emad and Manny. This is the beginning. We'll continue.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Michael?
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much, Manny, Ahmad, and all the young group of artists there. And thank you, colleagues, for your wisdom, your insights, and your commitment to share in this, very good way of talking about the art, the pieces of work, and also to connect with what we are doing in terms of our own faith and faithfulness and relating to current realities around us. So I would like to take this opportunity, and while Sione is preparing to give us a poetic benediction, on behalf of the Council for World Mission, the General Secretariat, the eDARE team, to express our profound thanks and appreciation for all who have given so much of their time, their wisdom, and their energy to this collective effort, collective work of radical engagement and discernment. And it is our wish that the energy and the wisdom and the learnings and the commitment will continue to bear multiple and fruitful witness to and witnesses to flourishing and full life for all. So this is our final eDARE webinar. The recording of all webinars will be made available later, and it can be found at edare.cwmission.org. And before we end, after the benediction, there would be some evaluation questions for the attendees. And we are kindly asking that if you could please give us your feedback. It's very important for us. So thank you. And over to you, Sione, as you bless us.
So this piece is out of place 3. Out of place 1, the memoir of Edward Said, Palestinian. And for me, out of place 2 has the image of Jacob that Manny did.
Mm-hmm.
So out of place 3 is for the next generation. I look out from a room that has become a working place, from a kitchen that is still open for more learning, from a dwelling that has become a crossing, from a home that feels like a prison. I look out into silent skies, still huffing and puffing stain and pollution, touching shores still littered with the rubbish of civilization, masking the tears and fears of transmission and infection that burden the Black, the brown, and the refuse of election. I look out into ghostly streets, drained of intentions and chances, and I see parents desperate to transport their family to the next day. And I see pests and beasts hovering with no load to yoke. And I see mass leaders buzzing like mosquitoes looking for lives and wealth to suck. I look out and feel islands ravaged by the cyclones of climate denial, and beaches having a break from burning tourists, and slopes of trees so far to even feel the breeze, and neighbors so close, yet so far. I look out from our place with my body and my imagination, and I feel other places, other bodies, and other imaginations that, like mine, are also out of place. I look out because other arts, other strokes, other ways, other wisdoms, other eyes, other voices, other winds, other spirits, other waters, other bodies, other graveyards, other ancestors, and other others can let me come in from out of place. Manuia.